Hey, my name is Matt Stohrer and I fix saxophones for a living. Today I would like to show you a Martin tenor saxophone. This is a The Martin, aka Martin Committee 3, depending on who you talk to. This was made in Elkhart, Indiana in 1954. Same year Marilyn Monroe married Joe DiMaggio, I just read. So anyways, the Martin tenor, sometimes called the Martin because on the bell engraving it says the Martin tenor, although every Martin saxophone, or most of them up until this point, said the Martin and then something else on it. The Martin Handcraft, the Martin Handcraft Committee, the Martin Handcraft Committee 2. The early versions of this saxophone said the Martin Tenor Committee. So some people call these the Committee 3 because they're the third Martin horn that said Committee on them. Some people call them the Martin. Either way, they're going to be between serial number 150,000 and 350,000, which is made between 1945 and 1971. Now, the Martin Band Instrument Company, different from Martin Guitars, was based in Elkhart, Indiana from 1905 to 1971 when they got bought out by LeBlanc, who then used the Martin name to have some saxophones brought into the country that were made by Yanagisawa in Tokyo, Japan. So some Martins are actually Yanagisawas. But most Martins are Martins, and the easiest way to tell is to look for the soldered on beveled tone holes. Now, most saxophones have tone holes that are pulled out of the body. They cut a little hole, and then they put a ball inside, and they pull it out inside of a form, and it presses the walls against the form, and the ball comes out, and they end up with a tone hole. They level it, got a tone hole that's part of the body. Martins, on the other hand, have a hole cut into the body, and then these tone holes, which are separate pieces, are soft soldered on. There's two types of solder: soft solder, hard solder. Soft solder is what is used to put posts onto the body. Hard solder, or silver solder, is what's used to solder together parts like on the keys. And the heat needed to do that is red hot, but the bond is very, very strong. The temperature needed to do soft solder, which at the time this was made would have been lead-based, now it's tin-based, is much less. And you can actually soft solder stuff on horns with strong enough lacquer and not even burn the lacquer. Martins, on the other hand, have very delicate lacquer, and although this horn looks like it's seen some use, this horn actually is in extremely good physical condition, and it even came with its original guarantee. Now, the guarantee says, the above designated instrument has been built and sold under the Martin Handcraft Guarantee, which warrants it against fundamental defects in material and workmanship for 50 years. It's a 50-year guarantee, and the model and the finish and the serial number has been hand-lettered into this guarantee, and whoever originally owned it didn't even mail back the postcard, which would have been a 2-cent stamp in 1954. So that's kind of interesting. This is the original Martin guarantee that would come with this 50-year guarantee against defects or problems in workmanship. Try finding that today. So, 1954, this model range actually was from 1945 to 1971, so 54 we're in kind of the beginnings. This is a competition for what was the dominant saxophone at the time, the Silmer Mark VI. Now, this saxophone doesn't have quite as modern key work. The tone holes are in line from here to here, Mark VI, and slightly before that, the tone holes were offset, so your hands, instead of being like this, are more like this, which is more like your natural position. The pinky table isn't quite as modern as the Mark VI version, and the pinky table, incidentally, really, you gotta set this up right to get it to work well. The mechanism is rather strange, and you've got a lot of things working together at the same time, a lot of things sliding against each other. You really need to have good materials. You need to have Teflon in here. The G-sharp key actually presses straight down. It's got this long arm here that goes to its pivot point here, and it presses straight down on it, kind of like a telegraph key. And then the G-sharp itself has an arm that sits in a little saddle and rubs against it as it lifts up and down. So you really need to have a hard material there with Teflon on it. If you use cork or a more traditional material like felt, something like that, it's going to rub, it's going to be gummy, and it's going to feel awful. And the C sharp, you'll see, is one long arm connected to the C sharp here. that also presses down the G sharp. Now you need to have a really nice slick material because it actually slides as it goes down. And this arm here is really short, so you don't have a whole lot of mechanical advantage. So you need to have these sprung about as light as you can possibly have them, with everything in perfect mechanical shape, no binding, no wear and tear, anything like that. And you need to have everything sprung just right so that everything reacts as quickly as it should, but have it still be easy for the player to do. Now when you do that well, this pinky table can actually feel really good. You can roll back and forth, no problem. You want the springs to be so light that when you hold the horn this way, you can almost shake the keys closed. Now obviously when they're upright, they're going to be much faster. But if you do the springs much stronger than the minimum needed to keep them open when the horn is this way, you're going to end up with spring tensions that are too tight. And that's kind of true all over the horn on this horn. These horns feel best, I think, with medium key heights and very light spring work. When they're in proper mechanical condition, they can just feel beautiful in the fingers. Light, fast, easy, almost flute-like in quality, which is really interesting because it's such a heavy horn. The horn has very thick walls, very stiff metal, and those soldered tone holes have much more mass than your average tone hole. They're very thick and add quite a bit of mass to the horn. Interesting design parts of this instrument. You've got these very unique kind of Art Deco style key guards, which you don't really see anywhere else. Has an adjustable thumb rest, which is just great. I don't know why no one else does this. You unscrew this, and the thumb rest slides up and down, so you can adjust the height on the fly. And you can, because everyone has different size hands and different ways they do it. I like to have mine up a little higher. And you just tighten down that screw, and you're good to go. This teardrop-shaped octave key is really comfortable, and it doesn't have to have a whole lot of motion for it to work. I mean, as you can see, that's the full range of motion right there. It's probably at the point of the finger is a little over 1 millimeter. I mean, it really doesn't need to move too much. The drawback with this octave mechanism is that the body octave, when you go from A to G with the octave key pressed, it's switched from the neck octave to the body octave on the G. And the spring tension of the neck octave key presses this down to physically open this up. It won't open on its own, so the spring tension of the neck forces it open. So this needs to be in perfect working condition, and the neck key needs to be in exactly the right place so there's no lost motion, and it needs to be, you need to have a very slick material here. I use Teflon so that the spring tension on the neck can be transferred all the way down to here to open this up. And it needs to be quick and it needs to be flawless, otherwise you're going to have problems doing the octave jumps. Hey, so earlier when I was talking about the octave mechanism, I was out of frame, so I want to show that to you. So here's the octave key, there's the pivot I was talking about, there's the neck key, and the way this works is when I press the octave key, opens up the neck. When I press the G, the neck closes and the body octave key opens. And that all has to be completely free for it to work. Alright, hope that makes more sense. Now speaking of the neck has two interesting things going on. One is the way it's sprung. There's actually two springs here. One of them is a very thick piece that just serves to keep it from opening too far. The other is a longer piece and lighter piece that actually does the spring work. Now, because of the way this is, if this opens too far, it'll detension the spring that activates this. So that's what that thick piece is for, to make sure it doesn't open too far. But if you snag this on something and pull it, it's going to break the springs and it won't work. And now not a whole lot of repairmen seem to be able to set this up well. The way it looks is you've got a thick spring underneath that hits that little bumper there. I don't know if you can see this. And you've got a longer spring that does the actual spring mechanism. When it's in good working shape, it works very well, but you have to be very, very precise on the Martin to have the octave mechanism work well, and to have the springs tensioned well, and have it so the neck key functions correctly. Second interesting thing about the neck is the way the neck is tightened. Normally, you would have a screw on the neck tenon here that you tighten and it actually pinches the neck shut. But as you'll see on this, there is no such screw. The way this goes on is like this. So this screw comes out, there's a little channel right here, the neck goes on, you tighten the screw here into that little channel, and it simply holds it into place. It doesn't tighten this at all, it just holds it from moving. So therefore, and you'll notice the fit there of the Octave Mechanism is very, very close. It has to be perfect for this to work well. So therefore, since you're not actually tightening anything here, the fit between the inner tenon and the tenon receiver has to be perfect. Otherwise, you're going to have a leak there. And because of this teardrop being in front of the tenon, there's two different ways that you can expand a tenon if you need to refit it. One is from the inside, and one is from something that uses the outside and the inside. And on thicker metal, like you find on the Martin necks, a lot of times you need the one that goes around. And because this pedal is in the way, and it's silver soldered to this piece here, you actually need to unsolder this tenon, comes right out with soft solder, expand it, and then solder it back in. And because the lacquer on these horns is kind of delicate, you're probably going to experience some lacquer burning around here because of how much mass there is here and how much heat you're going to need to warm the whole thing up all the way around so you can pull it out. So that can be kind of a pain, fitting the neck on these, but you have to make sure it's perfect, because if you have a leak in your neck, you have a leak above every other pattern. So it's very important on all saxophones to make sure that your neck isn't leaking. Just on a Martin, it's kind of a pain to fix, so you really need to check that and make sure it's been done and hasn't been overlooked in the past, because it's a difficult procedure that can potentially burn the lacquer and therefore potentially devalue it. So people sometimes skip over it, even though if you've got a leak in your neck, I mean, why even bother playing the horn? Because it's just not going to be right. I mentioned that the lacquer is pretty delicate on these horns, so a lot of times you'll see ones that look like this, where they've got some speckling and so forth, but they actually haven't been used too much. Another interesting thing is some of them have this sticker here below the serial number, and that's where they put their patents. It's actually a sticker, it's not engraved in there at all. So if you see this sticker on there, usually that means that you've got original lacquer, unless someone was really crafty and peeled it off, re-lacquered it, and then put it back on. You've got your front F, works really well, and altissimo on these horns is actually really easy. And intonation, some people complain about intonation on these horns, but with like medium, low key heights, it really doesn't need anymore. It's designed not to need really open key heights. Medium to medium low key heights, it won't be muffled at all. They actually have a huge voice. They're very powerful, very rich, very warm. You can use them for anything from classic jazz to R&B with the right mouthpiece, or rock. You really have a gorgeous voice. This one I set up to be a bit dark, so this has flat metal resonators on it, medium closed key heights. If I wanted it to be super bright, I'd have the key heights be more like medium with domed metal resonators. And what was I saying? Oh yeah, the intonation. Some people say it's bad. I don't have any issues with a large chamber mouthpiece. These things just slot right in. And like I said, medium to medium closed key heights, you really don't need it to be any more open than that. And altissimo is just dead simple. The construction on these is very good. One thing you have to watch out for, actually two things you need to watch out for on these, is that the posts on these always seem to be falling off or getting knocked off. The solder just isn't that great. And it's very common to have to resolder posts. I had to do 3 on this one. And because the lacquer is pretty delicate, you're probably going to burn lacquer when you do that, unless you maybe use like a super low temperature solder paste, but then that's not as strong as real solder anyways. So that's something you have to watch out for, is that you'll probably find that at some point you're going to have to resolder some posts, and you're probably going to have your lacquer burned. Along those same lines is these soldered tone holes. Like I said, they're soft soldered, and it's the same solder they use for the posts. Over time it degrades, it corrodes, and you can actually have a leak in your tone hole where like either the solder is corroded or sometimes an entire side of it will disconnect. Now you can kind of like press the body, and you can see the body flexing there a little bit. If the tone hole isn't attached, usually you'll see a little crack open up. You can also take lighter fluid, like Roncinol, like you get for Zippos, and dab it around the outside. It's super thin. It'll wick through, and you'll be able to see it on the inside of the bore if you have a tone hole leak. And the lighter fluid, if you wipe it off gently, is not going to have any long-term effects on your lacquer or anything like that. So sometimes you actually have leaks in your tone holes, and those have to get resoldered. You can't just fill it. Sometimes you'll see these will come in and they've got like epoxy in the tone holes because someone didn't feel like taking it off and redoing it because they probably didn't want to burn the lacquer, or they just didn't have time or whatever. But that's just going to break down. It's just not going to work in the long term. If you want it to be right, you have to unsolder it, clean it off, resolder it, and you're probably going to burn lacquer because the lacquer is pretty delicate. That said, when you get these in good physical shape, they just ring like a bell. They're just really great horns. They're pretty cheap. You can find these, I would say, to get one and get it overhauled, or find one that's been overhauled, anywhere between $2,000 and $3,000, depending on condition and finish and what particular vintage it is. The earlier ones seem to command a bit higher price. And ones that are in extremely good condition are pretty rare because they're great horns. So they got played, plus the lacquer is delicate. So those can be more expensive. That's about it. So these are really excellent professional quality horns. There's a few strange things you have to look out for. You have to find a repairman who's familiar with them because they're not based on the Selmer design. They're their own design, and they do things their own way. So you have to find someone who's either really good at figuring things out and just understands horns, or has a lot of experience with Martins, preferably both, because every horn that comes through the shop usually has something unique about it that needs to be approached by listening to what the horn wants, rather than trying to apply some sort of formula to it or make it kind of bend to your will as a repairman. But that said, if you find one of these and you want to put in the time to find a good repairman and get it repaired right, you'll be rewarded with a horn with a huge voice, good intonation, great feel under the fingers, durable, long-lasting, just a beautiful sound and a beautiful piece of American saxophone making. And you can get 3 of them for the price of one Selmer, or 2 of them for the price of a really beat-up Selmer. So, in my opinion, these are really undervalued. I don't think the values are going to go down over time, and especially as these horns get farther and farther into history. I mean, the last one was made in 1971. There's going to be less and less of them around. So if you find yourself a good one, you get it overhauled, you love it, just hold on to it, because eventually more people will find out about how great these horns are. The altos are also excellent, and the baritones are good too, although the baritones for some reason don't have a chromatic F sharp, a side F sharp. They just don't have it. But they're all great horns. The altos, Art Pepper played one on alto. If you want to hear a Martin on alto and what it can sound like, listen to Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm section. The tenors have the same type of voice, just in tenor. So get a good one, get it overhauled well, and you'll be happy. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I hope it was informative, helpful, useful, interesting. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, feel free to leave a comment here on YouTube, to send me an email, to check out my website at storemusic.com. Anything saxophonic I can help you with, just let me know. I love talking saxophone, and yeah, should have just ended that sentence right there. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.